Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge. I'm the convener of the Social Capital Research Group. Our group is an international collective of people made up of academics and postgrad students and government and non-government people from and lots of other people who are interested in social capital research as well. We have a Facebook group with over 1,000 members and we post events on our website, socialcapitalresearch.com as well. And we regularly host webinars from invited speakers and also from members of the group, PhD students and other people who are interested in social capital. So in this session, we'll have an invited presentation by Professor Daniel Aldrich, followed by some questions and discussion. And then after that, we'll have some breakout rooms for anyone who would like to discuss the themes further or any of your ideas in these small groups, in these breakout rooms. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our invited speaker for this session, Professor Daniel Aldrich. Professor Aldrich is an award-winning author who has published 5 books, including Building Resilience and Black Wave, more than 60 peer-reviewed articles, and written op-eds for the New York Times, CNN, HuffPost, and many other media outlets. He has spent more than 5 years in India, Japan, and Africa, carrying out field work, and his work has been funded by Fulbright Foundation, the National Science Foundation, and the Abe Foundation, Japan Foundation, and other institutions. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Aldrich to give us his presentation. I'm sure everyone in the audience is familiar with his work on social capital and other areas. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Tristan, and thank you all for being here today. I know it's quite early for some of you in the Southern Hemisphere and a little bit in the afternoon for the rest of us. I've managed to catch a cold in the middle of the summer here in Boston. So if my nose sounds stuffed, it's not your audio, it's really me. So I put my email address and my Twitter handle here on the front page, just in case you have a question or a conversation that we don't have time to do today. Feel free to reach out to me via email or Twitter. I'm very happy to have a conversation on both of those different media platforms. So Tristan invited me to talk about the role of social ties in shocks and crisis. I figure I'm going to start a little bit.
Sorry, just to interrupt for a second. I think we can see your presenter view currently rather than the slide view. I just need to change that over.
How do I change that? Hold on a second. How about that one?
Still the same. I think it might be an option up the top of the screen. You should be able to change it over. Yeah, swap them over. Yep, that's working now. One? Great.
Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so I figured I'd start by talking about why I care about disasters. So we're looking at a house on Canal Boulevard in New Orleans. This was my house, our family house, back in the summer of 2005. We had moved from Boston, Massachusetts, down with our 2 small children to New Orleans in mid-July. We had 5 pretty good weeks in New Orleans. And then on the 29th of August, with around everyone else in the city, our home was destroyed. We had to evacuate. And what you see in that spray paint there are notes from FEMA and the other first responders looking for people trapped in their homes. You see the 0 sign is a good sign. It means they found no one in our home, which is good. But of course, 80% of us had homes that were damaged. Most people didn't come back for months, if not years. And going through that shock, having to evacuate did several things. First of all, I dropped my old research topic, which would have been Japanese electoral politics. Probably not so interesting to me or to you. That went out the window. Then I began thinking a lot about this idea of resilience, right? We had over 1 million people in New Orleans directly affected by the shock, by this massive storm. And many of us, in fact, until today, continue to carry with us a variety of memories, if not scars, from what happened. So I thought about, what does it mean to have resilience? What does it mean to bounce back for an event like this? And I had a number of very naive concepts of what disaster recovery would look like. And I'll begin with some of them that have been reinforced, in fact, by the government, by NGOs. Perhaps you've seen this kind of messaging before disasters. I've seen it a lot in North America. Perhaps you've seen this in Britain or Australia or other nations that have regular floods. It says every person should have a kit, right? This kind of messaging, to me at least, individualizes the disaster readiness process. That means if you want to be ready for a shock, if you want to have resilience, you should have bottled water, you should have a medical kit or a flashlight, all that kind of stuff. But I'll be honest with you, I didn't have that back in 2005. We were not ready in any way for the hurricane that came and destroyed our home. So individual concepts would mean, right, that somehow you are getting ready for what's going on there. The other side of this spectrum from individual preparation is the government will take care of it. And this is one of my favorite images from field work I've done in Tohoku, Japan, where the massive earthquake, tsunami, and meltdowns happened over 10 years ago. The woman standing there with her walking stick is a Japanese grandmother. We call her Oba-san in Japanese. And if you use her height as a reference, you can measure how tall that seawall is on her left, on our right side. It's about 6 Oba-sans tall, which is around typically 15 meters, or it's around 45 feet for those of us in North America, 45 feet of seawall. So the government of Japan has long argued that their job is to ensure the population is safe. And they do so by building these kind of large scale, concrete-based physical infrastructure. So we have this interesting spectrum, right? From you should get ready by yourself. You should have a kit, have a cell phone ready, to the government will take care of it, right? We have these massive structures in place. Today, if you take away nothing else from my talk, I hope you'll take away the argument that I believe what really drives both the recovery process, but even the survival process, has nothing to do with individual preparations or the government, and everything to do with the networks that we have. Those networks bring with them, of course, things like trust, reciprocity. I'll talk about that in a second, but let's talk about networks. What do I mean by the word social capital or social network? So we divide social capital into 3 categories: bonding, bridging, and linking capital. Bonding social capital connects people who are quite similar. So this would be people from the same family, from the same area, from the same background, right? Individuals who look the same, they sound the same. One of my favorite tests of this is to ask people if they like sushi or not, right? The Japanese raw fish. We know this, that people typically in North America over 60 tend not to, right? And people under that age tend to like it. So it's an easy way to see who's in my cohort, right? Who's in my age group. The music that you listen to, the websites that you frequent, those are easy ways to tell who else is like you. The good thing about humanity, though, is that not all of our ties are bonding ties. We often connect people that are different than us, religiously, nationally, ethnically, educationally, and we call that bridging social capital, right? What is bridging social capital? Bridging social capital means we connect to someone often through what's called a weak or thin tie, who's different from us. It might be through a kindergarten, it could be through a school or workplace. It might even be, in fact, through a club that you've joined. Maybe you like opera, maybe you like bocce ball, right? So bonding and bridging ties are both horizontal ties. Everyone in these networks has the same levels of power and authority. Linking social capital, in contrast, is a vertical tie. It connects me as a normal person to someone above me with power and authority and resources. So for example, let's say I know the mayor of Boston or the governor of Massachusetts. Or I've got a connection to the head of the Red Cross or the head of FEMA. I'm going to argue today that bonding, bridging, and linking ties can be measured, the impact can be seen, and their amounts in society can also be changed. Let's talk about why these bonding, bridging, and linking matter first, though. Why does it matter that we have bonding, bridging, and linking ties? Whoops, sorry, yeah, there you go. So here's why. The very first decision made by me as a survivor of Hurricane Katrina and by all the other survivors of shocks, for example, right now in Florida, after the collapse of the building there near Miami, after the fires in Oregon, after the mudslide in Atami City in Japan, is whether or not to remain in an area that's vulnerable, to remain in an area that's going to be hit by future shocks, or to move from that area, to move away from Miami, let's say, or to move away from the mountainous areas of Japan like Atamishi, and to go to someplace safer. If survivors choose to leave, we call that exit. Now, why would you want to exit? Oftentimes, the costs of remaining in a damaged area are very high. There are psychological costs. Every day that you're there, you may have to deal with the fact that you lost a loved one or a friend. Maybe your business has been destroyed. Maybe your savings are gone when your home got collapsed, right? So there are psychological costs. There are financial costs. Every day that you're there, you could be someplace else with a business that's operating normally with normal clients, as opposed to being in a disaster zone with no electricity, no water, and no one buying your stuff. And of course, there are opportunity costs as well. Every day, every week, every month that you're there, you and your children are facing an uphill battle to rebuild, in contrast with life in some place that's less vulnerable, that hasn't faced those kind of shocks. The alternative to using exit after a disaster is using voice. Voice means you decide to stay in that damaged area. You stay to fight, to work on the recovery and the repair. Now, I just mentioned all those costs that are there, right? Financial, psychological, opportunity costs. Why would you stay? Why would you use this thing called voice? Well, what we found in our studies around the world was individuals with stronger bonding and bridging ties, individuals with a sense of community and a sense of place, those individuals, whether in India, in Japan, in Israel, in North America, in Ghana, all of them with stronger ties were more willing to stay and invest in recovery than individuals with fewer ties, less of a sense of place. That's the very first way that these matter. The next theoretical reason why these ties matter is the ability to overcome collective action challenges. Now, if you're living on the planet Earth right now, you've been through one, it's masking during COVID-19, right? Masking during COVID-19 worked really well if everyone, or as many close to everyone we could get, wore masks. If only some people wore masks, it didn't work very well. So it's a collective action problem to get everyone to coordinate their behavior and do the same thing. It's a lot easier to get people to coordinate and do the same thing if you share common values, if you have bonds to each other, if you've worked together in the past. For example, you can imagine if you tried to call a meeting with people that you've never met before, or invited them to go to an event that they've never experienced before. Much more challenging than if they know who you are, they've been there before, they're comfortable with you. So these collective action problems, like masking during a shock, for example, are much more easily overcome when we have trust, reciprocity, and stronger ties. And the final reason that these kind of bonds make a difference is because they provide what we call mutual aid or informal insurance. After a shock, whether it's a tsunami, a volcano, a collapse of a building, many normal providers are shut down. So medical providers, healthcare providers, providers of education, daycare, they're often shut for weeks, if not months. My community in New Orleans, for example, had no working gas stations for almost half a year. It's a long way to go to get gasoline if there's nothing nearby. Same thing with providing education for children, for example, watching your children. So how do you handle the lack of those services? If you're very lucky, before the disaster, you've built ties and connections to people nearby. And those ties then can provide things like information, guidance, resources, a place to stay. This informal insurance is available to you because you built those ties. If you lack connections to people nearby, if you've never met someone who's your neighbor, and after a tsunami, after a flood, you knock on the door and say, "Hi, my name is Daniel. Can I please come and stay at your house for the next 2 weeks?" That's probably not going to go very well. In contrast, if you built ties with them before, you're more willing to get aid and to give it as well. So these three things really matter. I'm going to now switch to actual data, beginning even before disaster comes. How do these kind of social ties make a difference even before a shock arrives? And for this, I'm going to go back in time to 2017 to Hurricane Irma here in North America. If you can see on your screen, there is a red dot area on the peninsula of Florida, and that dot kind of gets obliterated by blue dots. Don't worry, the red dots are people whose cell phone signals put them exactly in the path of Hurricane Irma. The blue dot signals are people who've moved away from the red area and are now becoming safer. In other words, this is a map of evacuation based on data that we got from cell phones. And we wanted to understand, okay, well, the hurricane came on the 8th of September. We wanted to know who left on the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, who left before it got there. Now, of course, we'd hope that everyone would leave a dangerous area before the shock arrives. That's the easiest way to save lives, is to simply avoid the shock, to avoid the hazard. As you can see from the red dots that are there, many people chose not to evacuate. What made people leave or stay? So we used Facebook. We have over 1 million users working with us, and we measured their bonding, bridging, and linking ties. Here's what's quite interesting to us. Individuals whose ties were primarily bonding, that is family, friends, kin, people like them, those individuals tended not to evacuate. What we saw in contrast, though, was that individuals with more bridging and linking ties, broader, more diverse ties, ties to authorities, to science agencies, to the NOAA, those individuals took advice and left the area beforehand. That's the blue dots you see on the right side of that vertical line. So across not only Hurricane Irma, but Hurricanes Harvey and Maria as well, individuals who had broader networks, individuals who had connections beyond their immediate echo chambers, those individuals did better because they listened to advice from experts. That's even before the shock arrives. How about as the shock is arriving? I want to take now an example from Japan. And what you're looking at right now is the March 11th, 2011 triple disaster, when the huge earthquake 9.0 struck off Japan's northeast coast. That was followed by a huge tsunami, some 20 meters, 60 feet in some places. And those two together shut down the nuclear power plant cooling systems at Fukushima Daiichi, causing, of course, the meltdowns at 3 of the 6 reactors there and the evacuation of 150,000 additional people. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but let's focus right now just on the tsunami. Here are some images from Tohoku, right? And you can see as the wave is coming in, homes being completely covered with water. Who survived this shock, right? As these waters came in, who got through this? So we began by measuring by town, what percentage of people in each town, there are 140 towns along the coast, what percentage of them survived and what percent of them perished in that event. The good news for us was that really big bar you see, a vertical bar at 0, meant that the vast majority, almost 80% of the cities, had no casualties at all. Everyone got out. The bad news, though, is that in some communities, 1%, 2, 3, 4, 5, even in some communities, as many as 10% of the population passed away from that tsunami. So now we have to figure out, so what's happening then, right? It's the same shock along the coast, right? If all the cities got hit by the same shock, why did some survive and some not? So we began by asking the most obvious question, well, what if it's just the power of the event? What if it's the height of the tsunami? So this image you're looking at right now maps how tall the tsunami was in each village against the percentage of people that were killed. And what you see is not a very good pattern here. So let's go all the way out to the right and Tanohata there. Tanohata is a small village that faced a 19-meter tsunami, 60 feet or so. But around 2 to 3% of the village was killed there. In contrast, if you look to the middle of the screen, Onagawa, Rikuzen Takada, Otsuchi, those communities had much shorter tsunami, closer to 12 meters, and they lost over 10% of the population. Go further to the left, Rifu and Natori, those had relatively short tsunami, around 4 meters, that's 12 feet or so, and they lost also around 7 or 8%. So you can see immediately that there's not a perfect correlation between the height of the tsunami and the mortality rates in these communities. So the good thing about being a social scientist is we get to ask annoying questions. So I spent about 1.5 years initially, and then I went back several times on a Fulbright, trying to understand, of all the theories that we have of surviving a shock, which one captures the actual events in Japan best. So I'll give you some of the theories I heard. The top left is an image of seawalls. And I mentioned earlier in the presentation this idea that governments do build these massive concrete physical infrastructure projects to try and protect their citizens, right? This is the seawall in Japan. Many engineers continue to say that what we need to do against these kind of shocks, whether it's a tsunami or floods or other events like that, is to build more concrete structures. Beneath that is an image of Japan's parliament called the Diet, the Kokai. Many cynical people in Japan argued that those communities supporting the party in power, they got better protection and more assistance than those communities supporting the party out of power. It's pretty cynical, interesting, we can test that one. Beneath that is the image of wave height. Many commentators continue to this day to argue that what mattered the most on that day was the wave height. The middle image of the Obasan, the Japanese grandmother, is of course about demographics, right? Maybe some of these villages simply had more older people and other villages had younger ones. And the final image there is that idea of networks. What if networks could predict accurately death rates in these communities? And I'll tell you why. We did around 200 interviews along the coast with people who survived and more interviews with people whose families passed away. And we tried to understand what happened to the elderly and the infirm. Because when that earthquake came, most Japanese students are taught, get up and leave your home, your business, your school, and flee to higher ground, to takadai. It's called tendenko in Japanese. So we asked people, well, what happened with your grandmother? What happened with you if you are a grandmother? Did you flee? Many elderly people told us they knew there had been an earthquake, but they were not capable of leaving their beds or their home without assistance. What had happened was within a few minutes of the earthquake, a neighbor came over, a family member came over, someone who knew them, a caretaker came over and said, Mrs. Tanaka, there's been an earthquake, come with me. In some cases, literally carrying them on their shoulders, in other cases, using bicycles and vans and taking them to higher ground. So there you see several things happening, right? You see that mutual aid, the informal insurance coming into play. You see collective action. If the person's very heavy, you need several people to help out. And these anecdotes were actually confirmed by our large-scale data analysis. Here's what we found. Controlling for all the other factors I mentioned, demographics, politics, the height of the sea wall, the height of the sea wave, and everything else we could think of, the best predictor of surviving came from the strength of bonding ties. A community with very strong bonding ties, that is near zero there on the left side, their mortality rate would be less than 1 in 1,000. On the right side, though, where you see the number close to 15, that's actually lower here. We flip the axis. There, the mortality rate would close to be 1 in 50. So just by the power alone of these connections, certain communities were able to save more individuals because of that collective action and informal aid. Other communities along the coast, unfortunately, didn't have those ties in place and didn't do as well. So we've talked about evacuation, we talked about the event. How about the recovery process, right? What's going to make a difference as towns along the coast of Japan try to recover? I've put on the slide here 9 different communities from the coast. And I've tried to scale them all on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 meaning everything is perfect, every railway is operating, every school is full of kids, the real estate market is thriving, there are businesses that are working, to 50, 50 means half of all that stuff is working, to 0, 0 means nothing is working. So it's a scale of 0 to 100. And the first column shows immediately after that tsunami was done, how are these communities faring, right? Most of them were reduced from 100% of everything working down to 1/3 or less. Then you look at 2 years after and 3 years after, and you see a number of these communities don't seem to be moving back very fast. Some of them are stuck at around 50% recovery. Others, and this is the bottom rows there, with the fast recovery, Ofunato, Yamada, Rikuzen, Takata, those communities are back to almost 100% within 3 years. So what is driving the ability of these communities to go from 1/3 or 1/8, like Yamada was down to about 14% capacity, down from 100, right? They lost 86% of what they had. What helped them bounce back? So I'll give you some images and you can tell me what you think. So this is an image of the city of Ishinomaki. The left side image was taken about 2 weeks after the tsunami. On the right, less than 2 years afterwards. And you see it's the exact same angle. Notice the yellow tape there, right, on that pillar. That's actually a telephone pole carrying electricity and so forth. You see that the debris is all gone. The bicycles and everything else are put back in their places. The bricks are restored. Even the fronts of the buildings have been repainted and redone. Of course, what you don't see are people walking around. The physical infrastructure is back in these cities. Hard to tell though about businesses, clients, students, and so forth. Another image I have is from Sendai. This is from Tagajo. 2 weeks, about a year and about 2 years. And again, you see people cleaning up. Things are going well. So we try to measure recovery, not just based on is the debris gone, are the roads working? We also wanted to measure things like business recovery, students being in schools, the medical systems operating, right? So we actually had a 5-part index of recovery. And before I tell you exactly what drove that, I want to tell you one more story that we noticed there. Yeah, there's a white car there that has been there throughout the entire process. I suspect it's insurance fraud, but I'm not quite sure. So I'll tell you another story before I tell you the answer to what drove this. I spent a lot of time wandering through towns in Tohoku, and I came to a place I'm going to call Coastal City, and you'll see why in a second. Coastal City had what looked like a bridge from a long distance away. And as I got closer, that bridge was not sounding bridge-like. It was really noisy, actually, incredibly loud. And it turned out to be a conveyor belt. And this bridge, so to speak, this conveyor belt in Coastal City was taking crushed up mountains from the left side of the screen to the downtown over a mile, over 2 kilometers, to drop all this rubble downtown and to build the downtown up. That's about 14 meters above sea level, right? Before it was at sea level. Now it's about 35, 36 feet above sea level. I was like, holy, my goodness, wow. Like I did not expect to find this massive earth moving machinery here in the middle of this very small village. This village, by the way, had less than 15,000 people. So I poked around. I was like, how much does this massive earth moving machinery cost, this thing from the future? And I got the numbers from City Hall, over $200 million US, $200 million. Now the budget for the whole community wasn't even $20 million, right? So I was very surprised. I said, well, how did you afford a $200 million, whatever this is called, conveyor belt? And I've been to all the other villages nearby, right? No one else had this either. And I began finding actually the budget they had for rebuilding was closer to $3 billion US. This one small community of less than 16,000 people. It's a farming and fishing community, right? That they didn't have gold mines, they didn't have platinum mines or lithium mines or uranium mines, just fishing and farming. So it turned out that a member of the mayor's cabinet was good friends from school with a member of the national cabinet, the Kagicho up there. He was a member of the recovery field. And soon after the disaster happened, he called his friend and said, look, we're a small fishing village. We're not going to get very far with our local resources. Can you give us some money to help rebuild? And his friend working the phone at the other end in Tokyo said, yeah, sure. How much do you need? Now, that sounds glib, but this was the only community in Tohoku to get not only this kind of earth-moving machinery, but the broader funding they had for rebuilding. So now maybe you know where I'm going to go with this. What predicted stronger recoveries in these communities along the coast? Having stronger linking ties, having connections to people who are in positions of power and authority and can assist you in those moments of need. So this village itself, it could not possibly afford, even on its normal full salary, full budget, to build this kind of machineries. What we actually showed here is the following. If you had a number of powerful boosters, right? Think of someone like Harry Reid, right, in the US Senate here, right? A powerful politician who has a lot of hands on levers of power. If you only had 0 or 1 of those people, your recovery, holding everything else constant, was around 70%. But if you had 3, 4, 5, 6, even 7, which some communities did, of these powerful politicians working in your behalf, pushing money, pulling levers and getting that money sent to you, your recovery would be building back better, right? And that wouldn't be because you had better horizontal ties. It's because you had better vertical ties. The recovery process is being driven by these vertical ties. Talk about one more moment. In the recovery process, I'll talk about mental health recovery. Now, I'm sure you're all quite aware, if you've been through a shock, we ourselves don't like seeing that much water in the streets after Hurricane Katrina. We have a number of things that kind of freak us out still. Maybe for some people it's a different event, but typically after a major shock, right, people have a number of things that can concern them, things that get on their minds, things that make it hard for them to understand, what's going on. We call it some of that PTSD if it's diagnosed. If we call it anxiety or broader trauma. And I put up here 3 patterns, really 6, but 3 main patterns of mental health recovery after a shock, right? The first row shows what we call, quote, a resilient or resistant mindset. It means you go through a shock, it's harder for you to function for a while. For example, I know I was in shock after Hurricane Katrina for quite some time. And then after, you are able to come back to normal, or maybe you never even went down that far. The second level is what we call recovery or remitting, meaning, right, so this shock in Japan took place 10 years ago, in the same way that Hurricane Katrina was 15 years ago. But we know that some people have never quite gotten back to full recovery, which means, for example, some things might make it hard for them to function at work. Some things might make them very nervous or anxious. They may be seeking counseling or psycho medications. The final patterns at the bottom are the worst among us. People who have hit a shock like this, whether it's, for example, Hurricane Katrina or the triple disasters in Japan, and they become what's called dysfunctional. This might mean they couldn't hold a job afterwards or can't go back to school, right? They may need medications. So the obvious question for us studying Japan was, okay, we've had a number of shocks. And by the way, I already mentioned the Fukushima nuclear disaster. So we had 140,000 people who lived near the nuclear power plants. And all of those people had to evacuate. Some of them were only given 2 hours to pack up everything they could carry with them, and they have not been home since. Futaba town, we'll talk about in a second. Futaba is, it's hard to see the map, I know, on the right side, but that pink area of Futaba, they have not yet returned to their homes. In fact, I take my students there over the summers when we can go to Japan and we visit. There are now 12-foot tall weeds growing right through homes. Most of the homes have collapsed because of lack of maintenance. There are literally boars and ostriches that got free from local zoos that are running around. It has been quite a let's call it a ghost town, right, since 2011. Some others have come back, but we were curious, of these people who had to evacuate from a nuclear disaster, what has helped them or what has harmed them in that process of trying to get mental health recovery, right? So Fukushima itself gives us an unfortunate tragedy to use as a place to study what's happening with people's mental health. Now, our first assumption as a team was that we would find protective factors in things like income and health. So for example, we imagined that if you had a lot of money, you'd be more mobile. So you could leave areas like Futaba, Fukushima, and go someplace like Tokyo or Osaka and start your life again. We also envisioned that income would provide, for example, the ability to have counseling. You'd have the private money that you would need to hire someone outside of insurance. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The image on the left shows every level of income for our Japanese respondents, from around 1 million Japanese yen a year, which is roughly, let's say, 10,000 US dollars, all the way to over 8 million yen, which is roughly $80,000. No level of income helps people bounce back from that mental shock. Then we looked at health. We thought physical health might be an indicator for mental health, right? So let's say you're a marathon runner or you're into weightlifting, whatever that you do, right? And maybe we thought if you're physically healthy, maybe this kind of shock wouldn't impact you. What we found actually was actually quite worse than that. If you're physically healthy, it didn't have any impact on your mental health. But if you weren't physically healthy, if you had diabetes or cancer or asthma or anything else like that, then that actually had a negative interaction with this shock, and you had much worse mental health afterwards. So I'm sure you're probably going to guess here what factor was protective across our sample. It was the ability of people to have neighbors and colleagues that they know, those bonding and bridging ties. People that had gone through the shock with them, they kept in touch with them. Those individuals had measurably lower, what we call Kessler-6 or K6 scores over time, meaning it wasn't just a 1 minute or one time that this worked for them, it's worked for them over the decades since the shock. Having those social ties helped serve as a shield against mental illness. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, Daniel, great, this works for like a few disasters, but how is something crazy like COVID, right? Would this really work for COVID? And the cool thing is actually, yes, we have several papers out. I think our 4th paper just got published a few weeks ago. We have a number of papers as a lab out now looking at the interactions between these social ties and things like pandemics. So here's what happens. I mentioned bonding, bridging, and linking ties, right? Bonding and bridging are horizontal, linking is vertical. The image on the left, which looks like 2 squished violins, if you have that Rorschach test there, what it's showing you is the following. In communities that have stronger trust in authorities, there is less likelihood of COVID starting in their community to begin with, meaning people were following the advice of health experts, keeping the physical distance, they were wearing masks, they're staying at home, they're not going into work, they're teleworking. And in those communities where they had those ties, the COVID-19 didn't begin as much as in other communities that weren't following the advice. So here, linking ties meant that breakthroughs didn't happen as often. Then we measured across a number of New York cities, Massachusetts, Chicago, and Wisconsin, and pretty much in everywhere but New York, we could talk about that if you want to, everywhere but New York, all 3 types of connections kept the overall positivity rates lower, meaning having neighbors that you trust, that you listen to, not just, let's say, one source of news or one echo chamber on the internet. Having more bridging ties, again, having connections to people well beyond your immediate nationality, ethnicity, religion, and also having more trust in authorities. All 3 of those factors across these large metropolitan areas were protective in reducing the number of COVID tests overall. We also have an article coming out shortly, even on excess death rates. That is the rates of death beyond what we expect. There too, these stronger ties make a difference. Okay, I've been talking about what makes a difference. Now, how can we make a difference? This is one of my favorite parts about this talk. Because really, if these social ties are the core drivers of recovery and the core factors for survival during the process, what can we do then to increase social ties and increase social cohesion, especially right now? Let's say either during the COVID-19 pandemic, you use that as your example, during strong polarization in our country, here in North America. So let's start with the man in the red sweater. Hopefully you recognize who that is. That is Mr. Fred Rogers. When I was a kid here, I was living in Ithaca, New York, and every morning I watched Mr. Rogers, and he told me, Daniel, be a good neighbor. We didn't say Daniel, but he said, be a good neighbor. Why? It's very simple. During any kind of shock, we had a fire in our complex not even 4 weeks ago. Our neighbors were there well before the firefighters arrived. Our neighbor next door to us, Mr. Savitz, he's older, he needs his groceries delivered. When he didn't knock on his door one day, we went in there to find him on his floor. We had to get him out of there, get him medical attention. Our neighbors are the first responders, well before police or firefighters or FEMA, whatever you envision, as the government aid coming in, well before they arrive. It is neighbors who are first on the scene. Now, of course, everyone on this call, I think there's 50 people on this call right now, right? So I'm sure if I asked you all in the chat room, just to say yes or no, if I asked you the following question, can you tell me if you know the first and last name of 10 neighbors? I'm sure all 50 of you would all hit yes in a heartbeat. There'll be 50 yeses there immediately because you're all people who know the value of these ties. Unfortunately, that's not the average. In fact, the simple reality is that in most urban centers, New York, Mexico City, Tokyo, Bangladesh, fewer than 1 in 8 people know the first and last names of those 10 neighbors. Why does it matter? It matters because if you don't have that connection, right? If you lack the ability to connect with people nearby, that will mean when there's that shock, when there's a heart attack, when there's a fire or a flood, or there's emergency information that only you got, you will not have the trust and information to knock on those doors and get them out. or a system, right? So the very first thing we do, and by the way, the cool thing is, if you live in Australia, and I think some of you might be there, you know that you have Neighbor Day, right? That's there for a reason. Australia has all kinds of shocks and hazards. We've seen fires and floods. You have huge purple hairy spiders and snakes and stuff like that too, right? Australia's Neighbor Day is one way of responding, recognizing that the government cannot be there, right, in every state, in every city, because they simply don't lack the resources. People need to be organized. That's good. First thing is neighbors. Next image to the right of Mr. Rogers is a block party. That was from Indianapolis. We lived there a few years ago. Maybe less fun than you're having on your block parties, but basically it's simple. You close the street off to traffic, no cars allowed. The kids get out their toys, the adults get out their barbecues for their tofu or their beer, whatever they're doing out there, right? And they get together and enjoy each other. Why? Because beyond the neighbor, the immediate person most proximal to you, we want to have the neighborhood working together as well. Now, if you're thinking, well, I couldn't do that, right? How is that possibly going to work? Here's the cool thing. Thanks to our work, San Francisco and Boston now have a program called Neighbor Fest. You can look it up on Google, Neighbor Fest. What does Neighbor Fest mean? Neighbor Fest means, thanks to people like Dan Homsey, right? You can get up to $3,000 to $4,000 as a neighborhood every year to hold a block party. Maybe more fun than this one, right? Why? Because in organizing the block party and getting it together, someone's got to bring the guacamole, someone's got to bring the chips, someone needs to get the sound permit for the band, someone needs to bring the band, right? Someone needs to organize the games. All that organization can show you who's a good organizer, who needs help, who isn't responding to our calls for this party, who's putting out flyers. What a great way to get ready for a disaster is by having something that's fun. So Neighbor Fest, both in Boston and San Francisco now, is a program the city supports to build these ties before that next shock comes. So we've had neighbors, neighborhood, and now we're going to have the city level, urban design and urban planning, right? We don't think about it very much. There's something called social infrastructure, right? What is social infrastructure? Social infrastructure is the physical environment that helps us build social ties. Now, what does that look like? It could be a dog walk, like, you know, if you have a dog, you know what I'm talking about, you walk the dog outside, right? It could be a natural park outside. It could be an area with shade. One of my students, she's okay now, but Courtney Page Tan, she's now in Embry-Riddle in Florida. She had to count every tree in Cambridge. As I said, she's okay. Why? Because we knew that shade provides areas to meet in a hot summer. No one wants to be standing outside in the hot sun having a conversation. You stand under the shade where it's cool and comfortable, right? So she calculated all the shady areas, and guess what she found? Those communities with more shade had more people building trust and interactions outdoors. Those areas that are barren deserts, all concrete, right, with no areas to stand, those areas didn't have as many interactions. Think about Jane Jacobs, right, and this spontaneity, the organic areas. You need to have a place people want to sit together. Benches, a library, parks, anything that you can do outside that's public space, not privately owned by Starbucks, not privately owned by a company, but that people can get together in. So we want to build cities that are walkable and livable with more social infrastructure. Next program, bottom left-hand corner, is a boring meeting. Maybe like this one, someone's talking blah, 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 and you're taking Tetris and playing on your email, right? But we know that democracy thrives on civic engagement. People need to be going to zoning meetings. People need to be going and doing stuff, right? They need to be spending time in the bologna process, in the sausage making processes of democracy. If the same 5 people go to every meeting, that's not really democracy. And you get more trust in the system if you see more people showing up. School board meetings, zoning meetings, whatever else it is. So we help people think through, how do you have meetings that actually attract new members and build those connections? The blue box in the bottom is the faith-based organization, at least in North America and some parts of Japan, not many. There are still actively faith-based groups working to do stuff during shocks, play a big role in many communities, even in Italy, right, of course. So we want communities to engage their civil society organizations like FBOs. The final image you see there in Japanese is chikitsuka, or community currency. What is community currency? It means if I volunteer for an hour, if I spend time outdoors, let's say cleaning up trash, Toronto will give me $5 Toronto. Now, that money cannot be spent at McDonald's or Costco or any big stores. It's only going to work at local mom and pop stores, right? Farmers markets. It's going to work at a barber shop. I don't have any hair. It's going to work someplace, right, where people can get together, a local coffee shop. Now, what happens when a business gets those $5 Toronto that I earned? It can only spend them at other businesses. So now we have what's a virtuous cycle. I'm volunteering more in the community. I'm going out and doing stuff. And the community is now circulating internally, right, the money that I'm earning, rather than going out to some board of directors or going out to some stockholders, right, in someplace else. Now, the other flip side to community currency is time banking. Littleton, New Zealand, for example, had this really well after the Christchurch earthquake. A lot of communities have the same kind of idea. I volunteer for an hour, I get an hour of help in return. So someone helps me paint my fence, write my grants, take care of my kids. I go out and spend an hour picking up rocks from the nearby park. We know that these 6 programs work, increasing trust and reciprocity around 15 to 20% a year after the programs begin. How do I know this? Because we've done an experiment with a program called Ibasho in Japan. Ibasho literally means kind of like my place in Japanese, Ibasho. And that experiment was so successful now we have funding to build it into the Philippines and Nepal as well. What did Emi Kyoto have in mind? This is the founder of Ibasho. She wanted to build a place where even if you had no connections before, you would feel comfortable going, spending time and building new friendships and connections and skills. By the way, notice everyone wearing the vest in this picture, those are our board of directors. You can look, they're all spring chickens, right? Everyone there are individuals over 65. That's the minimum age to be involved. So this is not, a high school student group getting together because they're playing basketball, right? They're building all kinds of cool stuff. They wanted to have a yoga class, they did that. They wanted to have a yogurt making class, they made yogurt. They wanted to go volunteer nearby, they did that. So this group build whatever they want. Here's the cool thing. We have evidence from this community that Ibasho measurably changed the social networks of these elderly residents, even after a shock that they've just been through. So we just have to have 2 outcomes here. One is the network size, the number of friends people have. The other is the sense of belonging I mentioned early on in the talk, right? What we see here is that individuals who spend more time engaged in Ibasho, they have more friends and they have more sense of belonging. I couldn't squeeze on one more image, which is of efficacy, the belief that my voice has a difference that also increased in the area. Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. So the question I began with was the following, right? I knew after Hurricane Katrina that most of the literature that I saw had a lot to do with claims about individual recovery, right? Individual getting things ready, my kit, right? Get your kit ready, your water, your cell phone, whatever. And the other side of that spectrum from individual was the government recovery. I've tried to argue today that neither of those 2 spots is really the sweet spot that we should be thinking about. What we should be thinking about should be the network ties that we do or don't have in community. Why? First of all, horizontal ties, the bonding and bridging ties. I try to show that they're critical in getting individuals out of areas that are dangerous, but also helping build mental health back after a shock. As I mentioned, all of those shocks have different levels of impact on people. And we really want to make sure that individuals have that support. So building horizontal ties. Vertical ties are also critical, right? Listening to authorities, having trust in the CDC or in the local evacuation people or disaster managers nearby, right? And that getting those resources to a community. I mentioned Coastal City, right? Where they had that huge amount of money that came in, not because they were working harder, but because they had someone from their community who had a connection there. The other thing I've tried to emphasize here is the following. Some of us might think, oh my God, I'm stuck in a community. Who knows? Maybe I'm in Boston and I feel like I don't know anybody and no one's doing anything here. I'm stuck in, Sydney. I can't go anywhere. What do I do? These ties can be built. I've given a few examples here. There may be more that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But these resources, social ties, are not set in stone. Our lives, our deliberate interventions can absolutely increase them and decrease them. And with that, I'll stop talking and I'll say thank you so much. And I hope we have a conversation now.
Great, thanks very much, Daniel, for a fascinating presentation. We're going to open it up for some questions now. There's been quite a lot of discussion going on in the chat and resources being shared, which is really fantastic to see. I'm not sure any questions specifically for you have kind of really emerged out of that. So feel free to put up your hand if you have a question, or I think it's a relatively small group. We've got about 60 or so people, so you could even unmute yourself to get my attention if you have a question for Professor Aldrich. While you're thinking of your question, I'd like to start perhaps with a question, the obvious one, COVID. So a lot of these things that we can do to build these ties seem to be more difficult under COVID type situations. So are you aware of any of the sort of creative research that's been done looking at how we might be able to continue to build these sorts of ties, during a pandemic?
Yeah, this is a great point, especially since, of course, we've had to do physical distancing. Early on, I was really nervous. A number of authorities began using the phrase social distancing. I'm hoping that the authorities where you live are not using that phrase anymore. I fought really hard where I live to argue that no, it's the opposite. We need to have physical distancing, at least 6 feet plus, right? But we need to have social connectedness, right? Social distancing implies you're pushing away people who could be helping you. Yes, I've seen just in Boston where I live, a number of great ways people have used even physical separation as a chance to build ties. I'll give you some examples. Many of my neighbors, as I mentioned, are not young chickens anymore. They're in their 60s and older. So people went around with a piece of paper, very simple, that said, "Hi, my name is Daniel. Here's my landline phone number," right? Nothing fancy, no URL code, QR codes or URLs. "Here's my phone number. Do you need anything? I'm happy to get you groceries." Early on, it was masks. Do you need medication picked up? Or do you need someone to drive you for someplace else, right? So what we did was a very straightforward, literally under the door kind of thing, put it in their mailboxes or on the door, left it there, and we got a lot of phone calls. My wife made 250 masks the first 2 weeks to deliver to people nearby. We delivered literally 2 tons of groceries just in that first month. This was back in March of 2020. Good God, it's been a year. March in 2020. So that was a really great way to do it. Other people had other ways to do it. For younger people who are more tech savvy, like my kids, which I'm not, you can tell from my presentation, they had a lot of affinity groups on places like Facebook and WhatsApp. And they used virtual connections to say things like, "Man, I'm feeling really lonely. Does anyone else have a conversation about my favorite band?" Or, "Hey, I know this musician is willing to play. Will you join me giving him $1? If I'll give him $1, he'll play for an hour for us." So really clever ways to use online virtual communities to build connections. Now that's not going to work for everybody, right? Again, like my parents probably not going to be necessarily using, I don't know, a WhatsApp affinity group tomorrow, but they certainly happen to use the phone, and they certainly have used other things as well. So yes, 2 things. One more that I saw during COVID as well was an attempt to build trust, and this is what we're seeing right now. A lot of the pushback against masks, the pushback against vaccines, is because there is not a lot of trust, unfortunately, between certain groups and the national authorities. The easiest way to overcome that is to use local trusted people who are in these networks, who are trusted by the locals, but can get proper information from the central government. So that might be, for example, a doctor in a small town in Alabama. We know Alabama is one of the lowest rates of vaccinations right now in North America. Less than 40% of people there are vaccinated. If doctors who are trusted go around and say, "Look, I got the shot. I'm not growing 2 heads. I'm not giving out 5G, all the other conspiracy theories, right? Here's the things that you can do as well. Or at least if you won't get the shot, can you keep safe by doing the following," right? That's very different than someone like Fauci or President Biden, who someone in Alabama may not even trust, or may they feel the opposite, right? They may distrust them actively. So again, this is where a network approach, as opposed to the individual, right? The individual approach says, "Shut up and get your vaccine." That's probably not going to work. The other approach is the government will mandate the vaccine. Also probably not going to work. But if the network that you're in says, "Hey, Daniel, I know you're hesitant, you're worried, but look, I got the vaccine. It's true, my arm was sore for a day, but I'm okay now." Those kind of personalized stories in the network itself are much more effective, right, than any kind of blather from someone who I'm never going to meet in real life. Or again, the idea just shut up and do it, also not going to work.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of those ideas you're talking about in the disaster response, fantastic ideas, and similar sorts of things happened here in New Zealand. There was people would put color-coded pieces of paper in windows to indicate that they need something, or they don't need something, or they're fine, and
That's
people
great.
would put teddy bears in windows as sort of a symbol for children, like families walking around the neighborhood. They could find the teddy bears in people's windows. And I'm sure we all have stories of this. We know about the singing from balconies in Italy, and there's stories all around the world about this. And I think like the really important thing about your research and the work that you're doing, and probably others as well, is that it's emphasizing the importance of these things, and hopefully therefore our leaders can share these messages and can talk about these things and share these ideas about how we can do this, because there doesn't seem to be a shortage of ideas globally, on a big picture, but just trying to actually find them within communities, and it can be quite difficult, I think, for people. So feel free to keep posting your questions in the chat. Elizabeth Costello, did you feel like asking yours, if you want to unmute yourself?
Sure, thank you, Daniel. This was awesome. I was curious how you linked your resilience and design principles to the sustainable development goals. Have you gone in that direction at all?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to. The closest I've gotten so far has been really the Sendai framework for disaster recovery. So the Sendai framework, which was put together actually in Japan, Sendai, which is in Tohoku, not long after the triple disasters there, tried to broadly link the Sendai framework into the Millennium Goals, participation, engagement, that kind of stuff. I can't think that broadly at the national scale. My focus has much been more these micro local connections, but I'd love to think about that. How do we link in these ideas of a bottom-up, community-centered approach to disaster mitigation and recovery to these, national goals of, is our society providing, food, education, clothing? Do we have people who are literate and active in society? I think that's a great question, and I'd love to pursue that more.
Great. I think, Christopher, you had your question in the chat. If you would like to unmute yourself, you can. Alternatively, I can ask it on your behalf, but feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask it yourself. Just give you a second if you want to do that. Christopher Chinapu. No, I'll ask it on your behalf.
Go ahead.
You're there. Go ahead, Christopher.
Good day, Professor. The question that I had to do with the issues of race, caste, and class, and how those impact on social capital development, and if they do, how can we go about being intentional about addressing probably the building of social capital in vulnerable communities and so on?
That's a fantastic question, Christopher. Thank you very much for that question. So several things. Actually, we've published a little bit about this. One of them was on research after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, primarily around areas like Nagapattinam and Chennai in Tamil Nadu. And there I did field work with a number of my colleagues, and we found very strongly that the bonding social ties that came with the caste councils, the Panchayat, those strongly affected issues of recovery. So one quick story I can give you is that if you are a member of the Panchayat, you are almost guaranteed to get assistance after this major shock, which killed 145,000 people there by itself. But unfortunately, a number of people were deliberately left off those lists by the Panchayat. For example, widows often were not on there. People of a different caste or religion were often left off there as well. Those individuals literally did not get aid from the town at all, and NGOs had to bypass that institution to give them aid directly. I know this because we did interviews with both sides, actually all three sides, the NGOs, the recipients, and the caste councils. So there's a good example right there of strong bonding ties, unfortunately, having a negative impact. We've talked about this in other projects as well, where very strong sense of in-group solidarity can often create negative outcomes during and after a shock like a disaster. So again, if I see my own people as the most important and you're not in with my people, then I'll help my people first before you. There's a great paper, I can't remember who wrote this one, this is just about 2 years ago, that looked at American poverty statistics after shocks in counties in North America. Here's what they found. If most of the groups in the county were in-group focused, that is bonding only, helping only themselves, the overall welfare of the county decreased over time. The average person did worse. But if most of the groups in the county, the NGOs, the churches, mosques, synagogues, spaghetti monster events, if those groups did outward focusing, bridging focusing, then overall welfare increased over time. So very much depends, right, on the orientation of my group, my caste, my tribe. So yes, Christopher, absolutely. We have a lot of research showing the good and bad aspect of this. And that tells us several things. One is bonding ties should not be our focus. Typically, we don't need to build those because those are the easiest to build. Again, let's say for fun right now, you're listening to me, English is your first language, you speak fast like me, you can probably relate to me pretty well. If Japanese is your first language, and for me it's a second, it's probably harder for us to connect. So maybe I wouldn't be in your bonding circles. So we want to build bridging and linking ties then, right? The activities that we're doing as society, as let's say local governments, as bottom-up processes, should we build those diverse weak ties to individuals who are different than us? That's what I would say. And by the way, there's great work in Boston by people like Dr. Tia Martin. Her whole life's goal as the Chief Resilience Officer in Boston has been connecting across the color line here in Boston, which is very, very strong.
Great.
Go ahead. Just a quick follow-up. Can I get a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure, go on.
And the intentional and coordinated effort to build the social cohesion, resilience, and social infrastructure in vulnerable communities help to prevent and respond, how we prevent and respond to disasters, and could all of this be part of what we consider to be environmental and social justice? How do these issues interlink?
Yeah, 100%. So that, I mean, I've got a project now I'm working on now, looking at civic and social infrastructure and the uneven distribution across communities in North America and parts of Asia. And of course, you can imagine, just like other resources in our society are not given out equally, even tree cover, for example, is not equal across parts of the same city based on the race, class, and caste of the people that are living in that same city. So I can show you, for example, in Boston, areas like Newton, for example, and Brookline have 45% more coverage than areas like Dorchester and Roxbury, where primarily African-American people live. So yes, it is an environmental justice question. Fixing up, I think, the social infrastructure. So again, here we're talking about public schools, public parks, dog walks, outdoor activities. Building that up is one way, naturally, organically, to give a more chance to form the horizontal ties. We also need, for example, work from the city government, though, to overcome past historical grievances that have damaged the vertical ties. I mentioned several groups in our society don't trust the government. Some shouldn't trust the government because they've made very, very, very bad choices in working with them, right? So we have a lot of work to do in America to overcome 400 years of racism. That is to say, the government, local, national, and regional need to think through how do we come to communities of color? How are we coming to vulnerable communities? The good news, though, is it can be built. And there are a number of projects I'm not directly involved with, but I'm studying right now, where in communities of color, in poor communities, these resources can make a difference during shocks. It just requires a deliberate process. Again, the organic process we've been using until now isn't going to be good enough to try and overcome the inequities in that distribution.
Great. Thanks for your question, Christopher. I think Howard Lawrence, I think you're next to ask your question, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thanks. And thanks for the presentation and all your work, Dr. Aldrich, in this space. A couple of pieces that we're interested in, and they really hinge on your illustration of the block party. It's really the scale at the neighborhood. More attention to the various scales and dynamics of the neighboring relationship. So, the block party, which is just the block, has very different qualities to it than the all neighborhood parties, and the relationships that are built are very different there. So just, are you seeing any work on the neighboring relationship at its different scales, the different kinds of relationships that form in neighborhoods, like friends within the neighborhood? So, I guess those would be in the end bonding capital within the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a great question, Howard. Thank you. So it's funny. Some of this research has come from anthropologists, actually, who, for example, have tried to map out where is the actual neighborhood boundary, not based on the city's measurement or maps, but based on people who actually live there, right? So they have community mapping exercises. In some communities in Japan, for example, they carry the local shrine along the boundary of their community. And they've actually shown over time, those areas morph, they change over time as individuals come in, who are in, and they shrink as individuals are, in a sense, ostracized or pushed out. So to begin with, where the neighborhood is really a definition of the people living there. For me, maybe it's only my block. Maybe for someone else further down the street, for me, it's further out. So this is one of those areas where we really need much more research on the difference in scale impact. Wait, does it make a difference if, for example, we are working at a very small scale, like one block at a time? If we bring in 4 or 5 different blocks, oftentimes we social scientists rely on the easy availability of things like census blocks. There's no guarantee the census blocks mapped into the neighborhood that I have in my mind, right? So that associational world where I think, okay, my neighbors go to here, but not over there, may be completely different than what I'm actually measuring in a study. So I would say we need a lot more studies of figuring out, where is the edge of a neighborhood in city X? Who defines that? And then, what are the impact of those community connections versus, let's say, a block over? Does it make a difference? It's a good question.
Absolutely, and it as a geographer myself, it's very difficult to see the various overlapping social groupings in space. So it's a real challenge for us social scientists. I think the next question was from Daniel Bassel. If you would like to unmute yourself, or I could ask it on your behalf if you prefer. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. It's good to. Hi, Daniel. It's good to connect with you again. You sort of answered part of my question when you start talking about the research you're doing now of trying to understand the social inequalities in between rich and poor areas around the United States and perhaps in other countries too. I agree with you. The bonding ties are strong in a lot of poor neighborhoods, but the bridging ties and the linking ties are sadly needing. And Tristan, when you talk about the geography, the need to focus on geographic entities that could be as small as a few blocks that differ from others. So who else is doing this type of research? Is someone building a web library of emerging research that could be something that we all pull from on a regular basis?
That's a great question. I wish I could tell you that I knew of one repository that has all this work going together. I mean, for me, the kind of cool thing is because our work intersects with geography and sociology and political science, and also now urban design, and a little bit as well of but infrastructure studies. There's not one person that I know of. Of course, everyone I'm sure is aware of Eric Klenenberg's work, Palaces for the People, which is a fantastic qualitative study of this, where he's really put it out there. But is there a data set that came from that? I don't think so, not yet, right? So I would love to see if someone wanted to build some repository that talked about, I don't know, social mapping of North America, social mapping of Japan. We are trying ourselves right now. My team is trying to socially map very discrete areas because our funding is short. So very discrete areas in Boston, and see how that let's say, online mapping of things like libraries, parks, open space, green cover, map and connect to actual walk-through areas. So we're actually doing what we call this as a sort of a checkup, right? We're taking an existing map on Google Maps and then checking it up with a walkthrough. It's really time-consuming and really resource-intensive. And we always publish, if you know, our lab always put our data online at our DVN site. So once we get there, we'll put it up. But I don't know of anyone else who's got one repository where it is. Daniel, if you know, I'd love to see it.
I've been doing some of that from an aggregating standpoint. I put a link in the chat to a section of my library that has social capital links. The library is much larger than that, and another section is geographic information links. And by collecting links to work people are doing in different places, in aggregating that, the goal has been that it's used by people in even more places. As I see links, I'll keep adding them to the library.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you for your work.
I think this area that we're talking about, the built environment and geography, it's actually a really strong area of research interest in social capital, but it doesn't seem to be a huge amount of interlinkages between that body of research and other areas of social capital research that's perhaps more theoretical or more focused on social issues. And I think it was a couple of years ago, so it's not particularly fresh in my mind, but I wrote an article trying to really dig into the sources of social capital and in the literature, what's really identified as the sources. And I found a really rich body of literature there around the built environment, the things you're talking about, the nature of walkable neighborhoods and shade areas, green space, public space for meetings. So I think it is something that if anyone's interested in, the research exists, the work's kind of being done in that space to a fairly large extent.
Yeah, if I could follow up on that, there's a group that has a product called NodeXL, NODEXL, that I've been following on Twitter. And in the last year, I think their platform has attempted to create a geographic interface with some of their network analysis work. They would be good to an example to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. So
cool.
I think the next question was from Orlando, if you'd like to unmute yourself. I can't hear you, Orlando. I think something's not working.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you for that presentation. It was really awesome. I have two questions. The first question is about changes in social capital once these disasters happen, because I know what it showed is that people have a prior social capital and they activate that social capital when the emergency occurs. But I was wondering if maybe during the emergency that social capital change, maybe because someone moves out or for other reason, or if maybe some additional social capital is created because maybe some people need to gather, need to start collaborating together, and maybe that creates new forms of social capital. That's one question. And the other question is more about the methods, because you showed the results, and it felt like sometimes you were analyzing social capital at a very individual or personal level, and other times at a more aggregated level. And then you use that information to get to what it seems to be some statistical models. So I want to know if you have a take on that, on those methods. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those questions, Orlando. So for the question about changes, this is a great debate, actually, that I'd love to see more done on. If you know Rebecca Solnit, she's a fantastic writer, sociologist. She has a book called A Paradise Built in Hell. It's a really easy to read, quite interesting. It begins with the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fires. And her argument, based on the title of the book, obviously, is that even in hell, even in a terrible disaster, people tend to work collectively and build those social ties. Oh, fantastic. I see one has it up. Yeah, good. Okay, look, we have it right there. Excellent. So that's her book is fantastic. And her book argues that these shocks, like an earthquake or other events, bring us together. And by the way, there's plenty of research from the 9/11 disasters in North America that showed most North Americans had the sense of a esprit de corps of connections. What's more interesting to me, though, is the longer term research by people like Shigeo Tatsuke in Japan, who showed, in fact, what happens is after about a year, those initial connections seem to wear away, and whatever levels you had before the shock go back to there. So let's say you jumped up a level of trust, whatever it was, 1 standard deviation, it kind of came back down again after a year. So I'd love to see more research on that question. Most research I've seen now has suggested that Paradise Built in Hell lasts about a year, a little bit less. There's a research from the Potsdam ice storm in New York. I don't know why on that disaster. Also, that showed it lasted about a year. So yes, I think the disaster itself can increase it typically, but not forever. It's a short-term phenomenon. You asked about methods, the individual measurements versus community. Yes, so I'm happy to say that I would call myself an eclectic researcher, which means I will use anything I can find. I am not shy in saying that I have definitely used methods that weren't ideal because I couldn't find better data. If we can find individual level methods, we'll knock on doors, we'll do surveys online. If we have to rely on available census data, in fact, I can probably, if I have 2 seconds here as we're talking to you, a colleague and I, Dean Kine, and I worried about this issue, which is how do we measure social capital consistently across time and space? And actually what we did was we put together I just lose everybody's now. We put together a paper, I just put in the chat to everybody, that uses publicly available data, at least for North America, and some around 29 variables or so, a little bit fewer than that, depending on the area, to measure bonding, bridging, and linking. That's publicly available ESRI and census data. And that's going to be at the county level, but we've done it even down to the census block level. So yes, I don't believe that, the best data is always available. I'm going to use whatever I can find. Ideally, we do interviews with people. Sometimes it's not possible. In Japan, for example, we had, I think, 65,000 people in our data set across those 140 plus cities that we had in there. We couldn't interview all of them. So we had to go to a higher level aggregate. And when we're able to, though, we definitely use one-on-one interviews. And if everyone can check out the chat there, that article is an attempt to systematize this argument about how do we capture those 3 types of data.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the temporary communities, the way in which the disaster potentially affects social capital immediately. A couple of weeks ago, we had a webinar by Evangelos Tontis out of the UK, who talked about so from a social psychology point of view, talked about the role of emergent communities. And I think some of what he's looking at, perhaps in different types of disasters, might suggest that it lasts even shorter periods of time. Okay. Potentially, even a week or 2, depending on, but then again, like it really depends on the response, because if everyone sort of gets back to normal, it's not perhaps quite as severe, like your house isn't destroyed, your city isn't in ruins, then perhaps the emergent communities can resolve and go away quite quickly. But obviously different.
If anyone's looking for thesis projects, I think I hear one right here, right? Which is, what are the factors that drive short, medium, and long-term social capital changes after a shock? I'd love to see some studies that, even in the same city over time or different cities in the same area, that try to look at, is it the city beforehand? Is it the shock itself? There's a lot of arguments about repetitive shock cities, areas like Miami that flood regularly or Venice that flood regularly. Do they stop having an impact? Is it just sort of like normal life? Having a foot of water in your first floor, if that's normal life to you, that's not a cause to get together, right? So I think also this is probably about repetitive questions versus more irregular shocks. So I think that's a great question for research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're saying about those repetitive shocks, there may be less emergent communities forming in response to the shock, but there might be stronger, effectively, social capital as a result of those consistent pressures that people need to come together to overcome on a regular basis. An example of this, I think, is I was looking at a flood mitigation project in Nepal, and because floods happen so regularly, the community is used to coming together. They have networks, they have contacts, they have procedures, they know what to do. So there probably isn't much in the way, like you're saying, of it like an emergent community response to an individual disaster where people are immediately coming together, but they are all the time because it happens quite frequently.
Yeah. But again, I think that'd be a great look at, if there are different communities in Nepal with different levels of flooding, or North America that have different levels of shocks over time. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I see a question from an MJ Wilson. Is that a question that you see?
Yeah, we could move that one next.
Or maybe is it MJR2 on the screen?
Yeah, we've got MJR2. I'm not sure what your name is. If you want to
go. The name is MJ.
Right.
Hi there. Thank you for a great presentation. As I stated, I was at a presentation by Ilya Azarov several years ago, and he had traveled to Japan post Fukushima disaster. And he had said that their default practice was to relocate communities as a community, not just putting bodies where they could, and that kept the social relationships intact. It often kept families intact, as well as it kept children. Their school buddies were they moved as a group. And I was wondering, did you find that to be the case? And
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you, MJ. That's a great question. So I wish that were the case. And this has been a fight I've had with the Japanese government now since the Kobe earthquake, actually. After the Kobe earthquake, there was a thing they noticed called Kodokushi, or lonely deaths. A number of elderly residents who were rapidly moved from short-term FEMA-like trailers into a large-scale existing home area, like typically a large-scale danchi or apartment complex. Many of them passed away within months of being moved there, not because of hypothermia or because of a lack of food, but because they literally knew no one, right? They were cut off from their family, from their businesses, from their friends, from their doctors. And the Japanese government said in 1995, we'll begin moving everyone then as a group. That was the more or less promise the government made in Japan. Unfortunately, after 2011, and we've studied now over, I think, 100 and something cities there, we only find around 1 in 5 cities actually followed through on that. The majority of people were not moved in group location, they were moved individually. In fact, for example, Ibasho, the project I just showed everybody a few minutes ago, everyone in that city of Masakicho, they were all moved individually. So no one had any contact with each other before. They're all put there randomly from other cities nearby, which is a great chance for us then to build those connections. There are a few communities that have moved group location. It's been a lot slower process as a result. So some communities haven't wanted that, right? They've traded off group location for time. Group relocation means you need to have a new community ready for them to move into at the same time. That's really hard to do in Japan. Most of the existing land was quite vulnerable. It's near the sea. The new communities being built are on takara and higher ground. They had to shave off the mountains and build new areas there. It took them a long time. Housing was the last thing to get finished, sort of on the punch list after the shock. So yeah, I've seen his work. He's right. They try to do that, but I think the majority of communities that I visited and did interviews with did not succeed in having that really high level output.
All right, great. Next question. There's lots coming up in the chat, so I'll try and keep up and see if I can get them in the correct order. I think Sean, you had one in the chat. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask it about basic income.
Sure, Daniel. Thank you for your talk. I'm in New Zealand, and just a brief question. I know that many other books and authors and advocates of basic income mentioned social capital. Many of their trials are conducted in poor parts of the world. And I know that in your presentation, you've talked about your work. I'm just wondering if you've had any thoughts about basic income as a concept, especially in the COVID era, and also in relation to climate change and people having to move from one place to the other.
Yeah, Sean, that's a great question, Sean. Thank you. I haven't done the research myself, but I'm a big fan of the Universal Basic Income (UBI) approach. I definitely believe that societies can and should provide a basic level of support, a welfare net for everybody. I'm a big fan of Karl Polanyi. If you remember back to his work from the 1940s now, gosh, it's been a long time since you read that book, but I'm a huge fan of the idea that every society, and especially societies, for example, in Europe and North America that can afford it, should absolutely already have in place some kind of UBI system. We have seen, I mean, this is the great part to me, for COVID-19 is an experiment, at least in a small scale in some ways, right? And the response from workers, right, when they got UBI versus having to go to a job that did not pay what I would call a living wage, right? A wage where it's possible to live on, support a family, you know, especially in cities. And you see the choice people are making, and employers now raising their wages. You know, I'd much rather see society to begin with the argument that people can have a basic income and can choose to make more or not. The connection to social capital will be interesting, right? One of the arguments we make right now is many people who are very poor, I'm thinking about the work we've done in Accra and Ghana, right, who are very, very busy, they don't have the time, right, that industrialized nations have, industrialized democracies have, to spend on things like going to clubs, spending, you know, going outside and painting together, doing work together, right? And one of the arguments of UBI's side effect would be, right, that more individuals would have time to build these kind of ties. Not to mention, of course, you'd also build more trust in government. So yeah, I'd love to see work on UBI as an experiment, not just because of the economic outcome, meaning we'd have people who wouldn't, for example, go bankrupt and then be put out of their home because they had one medical bill from a company, which also happened during COVID as well, but rather because I think UBI might be a stepping stone toward building up societies where it's easier for people to build those kind of connections.
Absolutely, and I think it ties in very closely with the research that's been done, particularly in Europe, around the European welfare state model. And I think there was a book published fairly recently, might have been 2020, by Edward Elgar. There was a collection of papers looking at the role, basically, of the welfare state model and social capital. And so I think that, you know, they're important questions. I think particularly as how they relate to trust in government and how we feel as a community and that sense of solidarity and togetherness. So fascinating area of research. Next
Timothy
one, I think,
Little
is,
has a
yeah,
hand up.
Timothy.
Hello, and good afternoon, and good morning to some of you, and evening to some of you also. So my question is kind of relatively practical. And how is there, and I put it in the chat, is there a way to get local emergency managers to start using some social capital data to help identify and locate like people who need to be rescued first, or how to like prioritize resources, if you will? Yeah, I'm just looking for ideas, you know. Because I work with emergency managers, and so I'm just like, you know, we have these tools, I just don't know how to get them into your hands.
This is a great question. I think the sad reality is many of us academics don't do enough to reach out to practitioners, right, who are already working in this field, and I think would be receptive to this approach. So here's what we tried to do in the state of Colorado, actually. I worked with them, and I mentioned before this paper with the Dean Kine I put in the chat, to try to map out in Colorado by the county level. Are there certain counties that we know ahead of time don't have the internal social ties to provide, for example, mutual assurance, collective action, those kind of things? And are there other areas that do have them? And then they said to me, okay, what do we do now? And I said, look, those communities that are tightly integrated already and have the ties, those ones you can leave a day or two longer. If the ones where they don't trust each other, they don't get along, where there aren't past experiences of cooperation, that's where you need to go in first. So my advice was to take the map that we put on at the county level and then begin drilling down, okay, so are there certain parts of the county X, I know Denver County, whatever that is, right? To begin thinking about, are there certain parts of the city that need more help? And this is certainly, by the way, my advice as well to Boston when I've been working with councils here, which is that, you know, the entire city of Boston after a snowstorm doesn't need to reactivate every single bus and every single train. Certain communities, though, are reliant on those tremendously, often the ones that are underserved, vulnerable, and poor. So I tried to make this very clear to them. I'm not sure it worked, but why don't we think about restarting not the entire network of trains or buses, but rather making sure the individuals in the most vulnerable and poor communities have that mass transit to begin with. And then eventually those people who can afford an Uber, who can afford to hire some snowplow to come to their house privately, they get service later, right? And I think you do see some trickle down of this now. There's more of an attempt to recognize we don't need to mobilize entire, you know, networks back online simultaneously. We can divert resources to areas that we know need the assistance. And again, by the way, that could be, of course, because historical choices the city made a long time ago to, for example, divert resources away from the area. I mentioned Dorchester Manchester before, right? They have some of the most underperforming schools, the least number of parks, the longest lag time in police response times, right? So these same communities, again, these are not just one correlation, let's say, right? There's a broader universe of things happening there. So absolutely, I think we can use measurements of social capital or social infrastructure to be a guide and say, look, these areas, and we code them red typically when we map them, these red areas, these hotspots are ready to go. Sorry, one more thing I just thought of, actually, Timothy, on your question. One of my students did a really cool project. She took measurements of heat in Boston. As you know, of course, most urban areas become these huge heat sinks, right? Where a combination of air conditioners and metal cars and concrete that's black, right, makes it incredibly hot, hotter than areas outside that area that are green. And she took those maps with individuals who are isolated and alone. If you remember Eric Kleinenberg's work before, right, on heat wave, and she built an app for first responders to say, here's where you're most likely to find individuals who are in danger right now. In the areas that are physically hot, that is, the temperature is higher, right? And those individuals are not only elderly, but also elderly and alone, because you could be elderly and connected and have a swimming pool. You're good to go, right? Or you have a friend who invited you to the air-conditioned area. So yes, that's some work that we're doing now. It's a very small scale. So I'd love to try and push this. If you have any suggestions, people to talk to or conferences to speak at, hook me up to try and push this idea that we don't need to rebuild everything simultaneously. We should be stacking resources to areas that already lack in equity.
We need to get you back for a prep talk at FEMA. That's what we need to do.
I'm up for it.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I've got
about,
a couple more.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, about 8 minutes left before I've got to run to another meeting, unfortunately.
Right, yeah, we'll get through that. So we've got a couple of questions coming up from MJ Wilson and Neil, but there was a comment, a link posted by Howard Lawrence in the chat, which goes through to the New Zealand Living Standards Framework. So if anyone's not aware of what New Zealand government's doing, the Living Standards Framework is basically a way to look beyond GDP. So that the Treasury is saying that we don't want to just measure well-being based on economic performance by money. We want to look at other aspects of well-being. So they're using the capitals framework, basically built infrastructure, capital, natural capital, social capital, human capital type framework. So if you wanted to unmute yourself and comment, Howard, you'd be welcome to. I think it's an interesting one for anyone who's interested in that approach.
Yeah, the piece for us that we're interested in Edmonton is the municipality loves to focus or think about infrastructure in physical terms. The challenge has been to think about it in terms of social terms. So this is where the language around social infrastructure being the block party. We need the city to fund block parties, as you know, and it seems so trivial, but the benefit of a block social where people connect in the anticipation of some kind of crisis, whether it be large or small, or simply for the prevention of child maltreatment on the block, as we've seen in the research that when neighbors are connected, that is reduced. We've talked about loneliness and all those other matters. But when the municipality focuses on the built or physical infrastructure, thinking it's building social infrastructure, that's challenging. So I guess I'm in a way trying to advocate for more focus on what New Zealand calls the soft elements of social infrastructure to become the exclusive domain of social infrastructure. Like, let's not talk about coffee shops as social infrastructure anymore. Let's call it good physical infrastructure that's helpful to society. But let's talk about block socials as social infrastructure. If I had a dream to change the nomenclature, that's what it would be.
Great.
And it really is fascinating that New Zealand Treasury is choosing this path, and they actually have for quite some time. It's about 10 years in the making. And it's really quite a different approach to, I think, what we see in a lot of other countries. And it'll be interesting to see how it really flows through into action. So I think the next question, MJ Wilson, if you're still here, I know we've been talking for a long time. You're welcome to ask your question.
Hi there. No.
Yep, go ahead.
I already did. I'm
All
MJ
right.
Wilson, and MJR2 is the same.
Sorry about that. Okay,
That's
next.
okay.
Neil Denton, if you have a question still.
Yeah, hi. Thank you again, Daniel. Just
Sure.
always great. Lovely to see you. Just a quick one before I get to the question. MJ, I think that sense of collective evacuation, understanding the pre-existing ties makes a huge difference. So I've been involved in an awful lot of disasters, but there was one in the north of England where a village was flooded. 90% of them were evacuated. They were all moved to caravans or trailers, or however you talked about them in terms of temporary housing. But they recreated the trailer park by street name. So they recreated the village in trailers, and the difference was unbelievable because people already knew where somebody was and they would walk that way and say hi. So Dr. Lucy Easthope wrote a book on it called The Recovery Myth. Excellent read. Daniel, I think there's something around fairness and procedural justice in state responses that has a tangible impact on social capital and relationships between communities. I say that because I've seen it. I don't know if there's research to back it up, but you're the clever one. Have you seen stuff?
I'm just seeing it now. The terms social infrastructure is still being fought over, I think, in the field. Some people still define this as health infrastructure, which I would disagree. I think health is closer to gray infrastructure. Some are still trying to figure out exactly, does it mean the networks themselves or the physical infrastructure that makes the networks? So I think this is the area right now that I mean, that's why I'm working on this so hard myself. I think a lot of work needs to be done to standardize what we mean by this concept, how it connected to other areas as well. So I would love to see some progress here, and maybe Neil, you and I can chat offline and figure out some ways to make this go forward.
All right, excellent. I think we've got one last question from Rick Mask, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, Dan. I'm speaking to FEMA next week, and normally when I speak about social capital, it's in regards to leadership. They had reached out to me to speak. So I essentially have combined leadership during, leadership and social capital during crisis, for community resilience. And what I was hoping to do is, if we can, I don't really have a question for you, I guess, right now directly, but if there's any time between now and next Wednesday where we might be able to connect, I would just like to, because I think that you have you can inform me a lot on what I'm doing.
Happy to chat. That's my email address. I'll put it in the chat here for everyone if people have questions or anything else. So I'm definitely going to put that right here as well. So happy to answer questions offline. I know my time, unfortunately, on Fridays is a little short because of other meetings, but these are great questions. And honestly, a lot of the questions that you all have asked are the beginning of new projects. So I really hope that you'll keep asking questions and help working with me. I see a lot of you on Twitter. I see a lot of you on other networks as well. And I think really the only way these will move forward is if we take responsibility and try and push both in our communities and our academic communities as well to try and sort of push that needle a little bit over. So thank you all so much for these fantastic questions, and Tristan for organizing this. And please reach out to me. I'm very much happy to make those contacts and keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. And thanks very much, Daniel, for your time and going to the effort of giving us this presentation, a fascinating presentation and a really wonderful discussion as well after all of the questions that people have. And I see there's still more questions in the chat we haven't had a chance to get to. So we'll let you go. We're going to hang around. Anybody who would like to have some further small group discussions. So thanks, Daniel.
Thank you all so much. Please be in contact.
And I'll also mention that it was fitting that Rick Mask gave asked the last question as well, because he's going to be giving a presentation in 2 weeks' time on leadership, social capital and leadership. So it'd be great if you could join us for that one in a couple of weeks.